Hello, and welcome to this webinar. This session is Planning for Holy Week, Keeping Rituals and Connecting Community. I'm your host, Connie Stella from Amplify Media and Abingdon Press, and we are so excited about this webinar because it's live. We can hear directly from you. If you would like to ask a question or send a chat message, you can do that right where you're watching on Amplify Media's Facebook page or on the YouTube channel, wherever you're joining us. And we will be taking questions at the end of today's episode, but you can chat throughout the webinar. Now let's dive right in. This year's Holy Week services will be different. This whole past year has been different. So this season and planning for this season presents us with challenges. We're in the midst of this global pandemic, and we're living with really deep cultural divides. Many people are exhausted, and most of us have experienced loss of some kind. But this year's services also present us with opportunities. This year, how might our churches help people connect or reconnect with their faith traditions, with God, and with each other? These are the questions that we'll be exploring today. So let's meet our panelists. First, meet Kevin Bogan, who is the Director of Traditional Worship at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. Hello, friend.
Hi there, good to see you.
And next we welcome Dr. Marcia McPhee, who is the creator of Worship Design Studio in California and the author of several books, including The Worship Workshop, Creative Ways to Design Worship Together. Welcome, Marcia.
It's great to be with you.
And finally, joining us is the Reverend Dr. Kalia Williams. Kalia is Assistant Dean of Worship and Music, Assistant Professor in the Practice of Worship, and co-director of the Baptist Studies program at Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
And I meant to also note that Kalia is the author of, I believe, her first book coming out soon from Abingdon Press, The Worship Workbook, A Practical Guide for Extraordinary Liturgy. All right, I want to give you all a little roadmap of where we're going to go today as we focus on practical ideas for Holy Week and Easter. We'll walk through the week chronologically, so we'll start with Palm and Passion Sunday, then we'll turn to Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, and then of course we'll focus on Easter. So let's jump in. The first day of Holy Week is a challenge every year. It's both Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. So panelists, this year, this very unusual year, what ideas do you have? And Marcia, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, thanks. It's so great to be on with my friends. I get to be with these people in other places, so it's just always wonderful to be together. So glad folks are on. You know, Palm Passion Sunday packs a lot in. And so I'm a big fan of Holy Week. And so I'm always wanting people to actually come to Holy Week services to hear that story. So I'm less of a fan of like doing the whole story on Palm Passion Sunday, but there is an arc of energy, I call it. Every service has kind of an arc of energy, and usually it may start with a more contemplative prelude and then kind of up and then, but you know, Palm Passion Sunday has this unique arc that starts with the parade, right? So we start way up, and then I think one of the things we can do is energetically, it kind of goes from this big public story entrance, big energy crowds. And then it kind of, by the end, we're heading toward this more intimate. If you think about from parade to dinner, right, the upper room. And so there's this interesting arc of going into a more intimate feel. And so that's what I'm always trying to think about on that day, is to include both of those things and kind of end with that invitation to that more personally reflective energy that invites us into even more reflection and Holy Week in the Holy Week service. So that's kind of how I think about that day.
Wonderful. Other ideas?
I would say that the one thing that we missed most last year from people talking about Holy Week is they missed the kids with the Palm Sunday procession. They missed it so much. So the nice thing about this year, if you can think of it that way, is that we've done this once now. So this is our second time through doing it. So we can look back and say, well, this last year we did this, so let's change it up for this year. So that's one of the advantages to this year. But a couple of ideas for Palm Sunday procession that you could do outside of worship is you can have people come to your church during the week and pick up the palm branches and take them home with them and do a palm parade in your yard or in your cul-de-sac. In Kansas City, we have cul-de-sacs everywhere, so you know everybody in your neighborhood. So get the kids together and do something like that. Lots of neighborhoods have Easter egg hunts during the year, so go ahead and do it with the Palm Sunday procession. The other thing that's really big right now is the drive-by birthday parties, where people get in line and they drive by birthday parties. So you could do that in your church, have at an entrance, give out palm branches, and people come through and do a palm parade in their cars around the church. So people are socially distanced, but they still get the idea of seeing the kids waving the branches and that sort of thing. So those are my ideas about Palm Sunday.
So Kevin, you're actually going right in the direction of where I was headed, right? And so that is one of the big things that we missed, is that opportunity to see the kids and to wave the branches together. And so one thing that I've thought about deeply is entering into that Palm Passion Sunday, one, encouraging individuals to carve out and create that sacred space in their own homes. And then have the opportunity where they perhaps can drive by and pick up their palms. And then they bring a piece of that connection, having seen someone and having kind of had some form of communal connection, and they bring that with them into their homes and they add that palm into that sacred space. And then in that time of worship, creating this time where we're able to do it together and kind of inviting, in the virtual community, just to know that you are connected. Or how do you, do it, encourage them to go outside and in their neighborhood, they're waving the palm, to have that parade, but they're having it in their homes, and it still connects the sacred space of home with the community of their church.
One of the things that happened. One of the things that happened last year was, especially for people doing online pre-recorded, is that people took videos of themselves at home waving whatever they had in their yard. So some people were in the bushes and they were just like shaking the bushes, whatever they had, which was so fun to see the diversity. And you don't even have to then worry about ordering the palms, but they sent those in time for folks to edit those together to create that kind of wonderful feel of all of us getting to do it, even if we're not in person.
Absolutely. Yeah. Marsha, you make a good point, right? So even for those who aren't able to physically come and pick up the palms, but even just encouraging, go outside and grab a leafy branch and add that to the space, right? It still is a part of the connection of this celebration. I think that's a really good way to invite everyone with different levels of access to get involved.
Well, and that's what they did with, that's why it was palms, because that's what they had, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. And I'll add one note. I'm not a panelist, but I can say on this topic, last year, my husband and I we sort of took what you all have been describing, and we took greenery from our yard and together made a little, it wasn't really a wreath, but sort of a palm arrangement, greenery arrangement that we hung on our door. And it was there sort of as a reminder to us as we came and went from our quiet little home, and also a reminder to our neighbors. So that was meaningful for us. Other ideas for Palm and or Passion Sunday?
So I think for the communities that have individuals who are heavily connected through social media and have actually made the use of social media, I think this is a good time to kind of make a deal out of it. So create the hashtag and really kind of make it some way in which they can connect and then see one another on social media. And perhaps, because I'm with you, Marsha, I don't necessarily want to think about, let's do it all in the one day, but let's think about it, across this whole time, this whole week. So maybe it's the the hashtag frames the whole of Holy Week, and it just starts there. But then you have a space where, because we've been doing this for a year, so some communities have created and generated some energy around social media, and so you can have a week of connecting through social media through Holy Week, and we're walking together through this week, and this day just starts us off.
Yeah,
that's a great point. I love the idea of really starting and the invitation of Palm Sunday and extending that through the week. Yeah, that's a great thought.
Yeah, and I also want to remember that some people are needing to experience worship not through technology. They don't have access to the technology, or they can't figure it out. So a lot of pastors who are in the worship design studio are taking some of the things that we're doing and then adapting them for just on the phone kind of worship. And so things like sound effects, you can just do a drum beat as you read that story about the parade coming that actually translates quite well through just a phone call. And so remembering just to think about, no matter what medium you're on, no matter how fancy or not fancy it is, that these are dramatic stories, and we can bring some drama to them through some very simple ways, even if it's just hearing a little drum beat in the background of a phone call.
What an interesting idea. Okay, those are really great ideas. We're going to move on to those next big days in Holy Week, Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. So panelists, what ideas would you like to share about those days? Marcia?
Well, I just I just had a webinar with my folks in the worship design studio, and so I've got a lot of ideas, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. And I think we have a couple of pictures that I sent you all that we might look at. Symbols are so powerful in our worship, and so one of the things that I teach, I'm also a seminary professor, but one of the things I teach about worship is that having a good symbol can really help us, especially in times when it's difficult to speak in words about the brokenness we feel. This year I did a Lent series called Holy Vessels, and it uses beach glass and broken glass. And so to extend the symbol from that you've been using in Lent, extend that into the Holy Week. And so these pictures you're seeing here, the beach glass on the upper right, but the other ones are work by Ted Liddon-Hatton, who I'm working with, and we're going to video. He does this ephemeral art, and he's going to use myrrh, which is used in healing practices, but also burial practices. And that's what you see on the floor there in the upper left is myrrh. He's going to use myrrh and broken glass and oil, because my Holy Week service features 3 different anointings, oil used in different ways. So to create something artistic, Holy Week is such a great place to utilize your artists if you have them. Last year we had lots of churches who we mixed ashes with gesso paint, and they had the artists in their congregation creating paintings. So using artists is one of the really wonderful ways to incorporate something through symbol in Holy Week. And then also to create a ritual action of some sort, something we can do. So Stations of the Cross is a very typical Good Friday. And this is from a few years ago at the seminary where I teach. We created Stations of the Cross, and each one had a part of the story, but also a painting, and then also a photograph from real life, from modern life. And so connecting all of these things, and then people, we set these up outside, and people could just come on their own pace. They would carry a candle with them and go and see. And in this time of needing to do no-touch stations, this is a really great way of doing that. So you could set up Stations of the Cross outside of the church. Make sure you don't have too big of a crowd at any one time. And one of those pictures was just the last place that we had them end was to put a white rose on this shrouded, the altar was shrouded in black. And it was really virtually a walk through in the sanctuary. So people weren't sitting around. That was just the last place you would do. You just walk through, lay a rose, and walk out. So that could be pandemic friendly if you monitor the crowd and keeping people at a distance, but finding these ways that people can do something. So there you go.
It strikes me that the ideas that you've just shared are also things that a small church could do very easily.
Absolutely.
Everything that you've described so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to remind us of that. Kevin, were you going to?
Yeah, touching on the Stations of the Cross idea and the different areas, I thought you could do another drive-through, and then if you did the narration and music to go along with it through your radio, like you do a Christmas lighting, as you drive through those things, they are synced to the radio station, and they would get the narration as they come by each station. It would pick up, and then they would hear it, and they wouldn't have to leave their cars, which would be a great thing during this pandemic. Another idea for Stations of the Cross, if you have a small group, you can each take a couple of the Stations of the Cross and create those in your home artistically.
Yes.
And it would be fun to see what everybody comes up with in each home as you read the Passion of the Christ, as you go through the Good Friday experience, seeing what people create in their own homes.
Wow.
And do that like in a Zoom platform.
Yeah. Or you could do those outside if you were in an environment where that would work.
Absolutely.
Right.
Kalia, that might work in Atlanta.
It would definitely work in Atlanta. And that's something, some of the ways in which we're even thinking on this end of how to do that. Kevin, to your point, that's exactly where we're landing for our Stations of the Cross is providing, and even providing like jumpstart imagery, right? So here's some ways that you can think about to spark some creativity in individuals' home. Because some might just sit and say, well, I can't create Stations of the Cross here, but yes, you can. And so what are some of the basic things that you have in your home, and how can we help you think through creating these stations and then providing a guide that becomes very helpful of, a prayer guide, a meditation guide to walk through the various stations, keeping it very simple, that I think can be very helpful. And then on the other end, or the extreme end of having great abilities with the technology, is actually creating this nice visual walk through stations. So we're actually here at Candler, we're going to create some video that literally walks through Cannon Chapel, which is what our community would have been doing for our Stations of the Cross service and through the different places, and then kind of incorporating that texture of feeling the space, but also creating imagery that can be utilized in home and connecting and guiding through. One of the things that I think about for Maundy Thursday, particularly, right? That's where our themes of love and service really come to light. And for us, that's where we're in foot washing. That's our service. And so imagining how we can encourage individuals in homes, if you're in homes with others, right? How can you do this in your own home with those who you're with, right? And then thinking about, ways for someone who may live alone, what becomes a way to connect also? And so what are those washing rituals and those images and the way in which we can create, so homes that have community, homes that are single, can all participate in this idea of reimagining what service looks like for us, because we've been in a year long of just reimagining our own selves, how we think and navigate through the world. So let's take this opportunity to settle and reimagine what it is to love one another in this time in a very different way. And what is it meant to serve one another when we can't physically be together, and highlighting the ways in which we've done that over this year, and then actualizing kind of putting a pin on it, so to speak, right? This actual ritual of some type of washing, if it's communal foot washing or something that your community comes with for individuals.
I think that's so important what you're saying about those things that are time-honored traditions, and then not saying, oh, well, we can't do that, and so we just, we can't do it the way we usually do it, so we're not going to do it. But to find ways, and we have that creative muscle. We have ways of adapting. In my Lent series, I went in dust and ashes for Ash Wednesday. I went with the dust part, and I'm inviting people to take dirt, which everybody can find a little bit of dirt, and mix some water with it, and use that instead of the the ashes, which are complicated in many ways. And then likewise for Holy Week, the foot washing in the ancient world, oftentimes when you wash the feet of somebody you really respected, you followed it up with an anointing, with oil, this sweet smelling oil, right? So that's why I went to oil for a service, so that I know that, get some olive oil out of your cabinet. If, you're going to have something that can serve as oil. And there's 3 different ones, anointing the top of your feet for service, in the top of your hands, anointing your chest bone as a sign of healing, but also then anointing cross on the forehead. It sort of harkens back to Ash Wednesday, but it is part of the ancient church's ritual of baptism on Holy Saturday, the Easter Eve, and that anointing to as disciples. And so, sort of connecting that, okay, we're not going to do a full-blown foot washing, but likely there was some oil involved. So let's go with that, because we can adapt that even easier. So, just finding some ways to adapt actually invites us into greater creativity.
Yes, that is true. Okay, I want to throw one other thing out here for you to consider, and that is how can we plan some of these ideas and implement some of these ideas when there are, for churches that are worshiping in person and remotely. So you have people gathered in a space, but there's also people joining somehow online. Can you say a little bit more about that? Kalia, would you have some thoughts on that?
So initially, my thoughts are when you have someone, when you're in person, and then you also have the audience online, I think there's a big part of not forgetting the audience that's online, because we'll tend to lean into focusing on who's there and in person. And so there should be moments where we build in the invitation of the audience that's online to participate in the ways in which the audience that's in person is participating. And so you can have that connection, right? And so let's go back to, say, Palm Sunday. And if we have individuals who are in person and they're waving their palms, there's a moment to stop and acknowledge, well, also our congregation members who are at home, let's join us in waving the palms. I think that's super helpful to just make sure that our attention is bi-directional at that point, which becomes a little difficult to do, because we can get in the rhythm of leading worship, and it'll be a while. It's been a while since we've had folks in the space with us, right? So we'll get excited about that, but just not to forget that everything that's participatory in person can also be participatory for those who are in home. We just have to be intentional about making the invitation.
Yeah, that's right.
I would say also, we came back for about 6 weeks in the fall after doing about 6 months of online worship. And the opposite is also true. You have to remember the people in the room you're online for so long, because you're over their heads and don't connect with them. And that's what I missed the first 2 or 3 weeks of leading worship without a congregation. I didn't have any faces to look into, which is really the energy to lead worship. And so when they came back, I was singing to the cameras and forgetting that I had the energy back in the room. So just remember, if you're doing it both ways, that you have to engage both audiences.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
you know, and also to remember that technically, I'm going to get a little bit technical here. If you're live streaming, everything that you can create for a completely online worship, you can also pipe into your actual room. So don't stop using people reading scripture at home. Have them pre-record it and then use it both, through your live stream feed and in the room. So if you have that technology, that is something that's built in, just like we could share a video right now. So remembering that you can do this hybrid thing, we already have the technology, and if you're going to be live streaming, you have the technology to do this. So you might do a combination of, okay, we're going to have this people waving palms from their seats in the room because that's the safest thing to do. But at the same time, we could have on the screen those pre-recorded folks at home waving their bushes or whatever, and have that going on at the same time. And in fact, that visual helps to raise the energy in the room that's not going to be as high because we're not going to be singing out like we usually do. Okay. So that can really help the energy as well. So that hybrid, I'm going to be focusing in the next month on really doing some education around this very thing so that we can make hybrid situations that are not an either or, but a both and.
I love that.
You make a really, sorry.
I was just going to say, go ahead, Kalia.
Okay. So you made a good point that I think is really important for us to remember, even when we are able to move back into the space of having individuals in person, right? And so we're in this hybrid worship reality. Those who are in person, it's not going to be the way we were in person a year ago. And so there are modifications that even have to happen with those who are in person. Right. So I think the intentional planning and thinking about what we need to do and kind of being a few more steps ahead than we would have normally been still has to happen. And in that part of the planning, there's a lot that's going to be similar. In engaging an online worshiping community and those who are in person, because you're going to be socially distanced and masked. And so there's still several limitations that will be put in place that we'll have to think creatively around.
And just the way you enter the sanctuary or the way you exit the sanctuary, it's all different now.
Right.
It's not going to be the same anymore.
That's right. The energy is different. And Kevin, you know this, the choir, you're not going to have your mammoth choir sitting right next to each other, singing together right away. And so the things we have learned about making virtual choirs and everything that we know how to do online, we're going to still need to do in the space for a little while, right?
Can you run through a few of those things? So what are the highlights or the key tips that each of you would offer related to singing in worship?
Yeah. Go for it, Kevin.
Space is the most important thing. Yeah. They say 6 feet for social distancing, but it's got to be 10 or so for singing, and that's very, very important. You can also there are some singers' masks. I don't know if you've seen them, but they give you more room to sing. You're not going to get the big, robust sound from that, but the protection is there for that. So that's basically the way we do it. When we had the congregation there 6 weeks ago, or the 6 weeks, they all wore masks and sang. So I think mask singing may be around for a while. Yeah. First entrance back into our live singing.
Yeah, and instrumentation, using more instrumental music is another way. And also, one of the things I've been inviting people to do, especially around Easter, oftentimes we have recordings of past Easters, and to actually play the recording of us singing together so that when we're singing sotto voce, very softly behind our mask, at least we can feel the energy and we're hearing ourselves singing. That's another thing that we can do.
Yeah.
Marsha, you went right where I was going, right? So if you have recordings of previous services where you were singing together as a congregation, use those recordings. It gives a whole different feel to the dynamic when you can't sing out as fully as you would want to. Also, we've been doing this and we figured out, like you said, virtual choirs and all of that. And it's okay to use that. Pipe that right on in. So you have some singing opportunity there. And it helps just to engage. You can see individuals from their homes while they're singing because it's what we've been doing. And it just gives us another layer of engagement. But I am a huge proponent. If congregations have previous services recorded, go back to those services and pull out the music that you've used in those previous services and include them into these services.
And make sure you tell people that they're singing with themselves, right?
Yes.
Because it could be just any congregation anywhere. But it's meaningful if we know that this was us last year or 2 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. These are great ideas. We're going to shift now and talk about Easter, the big day, the big, colorful, celebratory day that this year is going to resonate really differently for a lot of people. So I'm going to give you some specific things to respond to. Just really wanting to know how each of you would advise people who are planning Easter worship, what specific ideas you can share for how smaller churches can adapt to some of the things that you're sharing. And especially, again, for folks who have people worshiping in different ways and different spaces, both in person and remotely. So let's talk about Easter and share some ideas for that wonderful day that will be so unusual this year.
Well, as I said before, this is the second time we've done Easter remotely. And I think we've learned a lot in that year. Because basically we're thrown into it the first Easter. So I think we're seeing it a completely different way now, because the hope of the resurrection is the hope of the vaccine. So I think that brings it in a, we're not going into darkness now, we're moving into light, which is going to make this Easter so much different than the year before. What we're planning to do is to do a big, what we like to do is we go from dark to light, which works perfectly with the theme I was just speaking about, where we start with Christ in the tomb, and we open the tomb, and we have the resurrection at the beginning of the worship service. So what I'm thinking about doing is taking photographs or pictures of pictures of the darkened tomb and that sort of thing, and contrast it with the beginning of the pandemic, where it was dark and empty classrooms and people not eating in restaurants and that sort of thing. And then when we get to the resurrection, show people getting vaccines and people going back to school, and contrasting with what will be in that current time, because this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity to show it that way. It's kind of like when we did on Christmas Eve, and we didn't have people in the congregation, and it harkened back to the time of Silent Night when it was written. So this may be our silent night time for Easter.
One of the things I'm thinking about for Easter is, while the day is the big moment, encouraging communities to really lean into the Easter season versus Easter as the day. And if we can lean into the Easter season, we don't have to try to do it all in the one day, but we can journey through the season, and connecting that journey from our Good Friday lament that happens, right? And so I think we have to create this space where we really do hold in tension, like the lament and the hope, right? The sadness and all that we anticipate. And so if we're able to look at it through the span of a season, then we allow that Easter Sunday to be the spark to us journeying together and understanding that our own emotional journeys right now are still ebbing and flowing and up and down. And in the season of Easter, it's okay to ebb and flow. And we can take congregations through that ebb and flow that ultimately does reside in hope. But even in hope, there's still the tension of lamenting the loss. And so creating the space for that, if we do it more through a season than trying to do it all in like the one Sunday.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
The Easter season is something that for the early church used to be more important than the Lent season, right? That was the Easter season from Easter to Pentecost was the big deal. It's kind of flip-flop for us. I mean, we have less of a sense of it being a season. We think, okay, Easter's culmination, and then most pastors take off the next Sunday. Mm-hmm. But really, it's the beginning of something. It's the beginning of that. And I do want to say something about Easter and proclaiming hope in the midst of what's still very difficult. I mean, we're not out of the woods, and we are dealing with the possibility of mutations. And but it's really, that's part of the radical nature of Christianity. And that is that we proclaim hope in the midst of suffering. That's radical. And there's a reason why we preach resurrection at funerals, because that's when we need to hear it the most, right? So it's important, I think, for us to remember not to unabashedly proclaim hope in the midst of suffering, because that's who we are. That's the commission. That is the message. And yet it's complex, isn't it? I mean, it is hope in the midst of suffering. And so I'm going to go back to, I'm kind of known as a symbolist, right? I'm really into how do symbols help us to express something. The first language of worship is symbol. And so when you have a really good symbol that can hold the complexity, it can really help you. This year, I decided to do an Easter season series from Easter, starts on Easter through Pentecost, called Dare to Dance Again. And some of you have been seeing the Jerusalema dance challenge thing, like all over the world, people are doing this little line dance thing to this song, Jerusalema. And I kept seeing that, and that kept, knocking on my door in terms of this is one of the messages we have to proclaim. And so my symbol, I found this picture of a woman leaping into the air holding a bright red umbrella. And it made me think about singing in the rain, Gene Kelly dancing and singing in the rain. And even though it's still raining, folks, we still dare to dance again, because that is who we are as Christians. And so finding a good symbol, there's also, I did an Easter season series called Emerge that looked at the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly over the whole season. And on Pentecost, it flies. So there's that sense of being encased and going through really hard changes and really hard things, and then emerging from that. Or last year's Heart of the Matter series. What really is the heart of the matter? The heart of the matter is, no matter if we're separated, we maintain this connection. So finding a good symbol, finding something that can really proclaim hope in the midst, that's not dependent on the pandemic being over or everything being okay, but is hope anyway.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm going to ask Kalia to respond to a question that we've had from someone who's viewing, and that relates to congregations where people are tired and burnt out, and where technology is sometimes not an easy thing and might be an obstacle, and that just adds another layer of something to do, to take care of, another expectation that is just overwhelming. And so I'm wondering if we can generate any ideas for congregations like that, where people they need to gather, they need to worship, but they need to do it in a quieter, smaller, more scaled back way. What thoughts would you have on that?
Absolutely. So I love to use the statement, and I do it quite a bit around here, that says, like, when a community needs to tap out, it's okay to tap out. And that's because we've been doing so much and pouring so much into the technological piece, and it has gotten a lot of congregations and leaders to the place of burnout. And I think sometimes the tap out means just step back and think about what's really important in this season, and how do we just lean into that in a very gentle and soul-caring way. Mm-hmm. And for some smaller congregations, it might be, no, don't go video yourself singing and praying and doing all of that, but let's just do a 15-minute conference call that's a meditation that we can come through. And maybe we do that every day through Holy Week. And that's how we celebrate. We come together, just pick up your phone, dial in. You don't have to look at a screen. You don't have to log into Zoom, but pick up your phone. And for 15 minutes, we move through a daily prayer or a daily meditation that takes us all the way through Holy Week. And that's the community's way of entering into this season together in a way that's caring for everyone in the community, if that's what's needed. Some congregations are going to be able to do all the big things, but I think it's super important for us to also model how we care for our own souls, and how do we do it even in a season that's noted for all the bells and whistles. we can strip all of that back and just lean into the heart of the message of this liturgical season in the most simple ways. And so I love the idea of just, a 15-minute phone call every day to move individuals through. And maybe it's sending something that they can print out and have at home to continue from that 15 minutes in their day. And it just becomes ways of meditating and just rest and restoration during the Easter season. I think is very, very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
And Easter's
wonderful.
in April this year, so it won't be quite as cold as it has been here today. So it will offer some opportunities to do some outdoor worship that could be done acoustically, which would be great for people to gather in smaller groups and see people that they've not seen in person for quite some time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Heart of the Matter series that I did last year, which is free to everybody who wants to download it. I think there's a link that y'all are going to share with folks, but I created it so that people could just do it at home. So whether you're doing it at home over Zoom with others, or whether you're just doing it at home, it's really scaled down, and it's based on the early church that just met together, they ate together, they prayed together, pretty scaled down. I mean, they couldn't do big things. So in many places they would be persecuted if they were found out. So they scaled it down. And so that's really the model that I followed last year when we were all first. Who knew we were going to still be doing this, right? But when we first faced with finding a different way to worship. So I love that sentiment about scaling down and just getting to the heart of the matter, so to speak. I have if we have time just to look at a couple of Easter pictures.
Yes.
There's a flowering cross. A lot of our churches do flowering crosses, but people can do this at home. Just send them a picture like this and say, make your own flowering cross at home as your way of celebrating Easter. There's another picture. The next one is, let's see, the rocks, I think. Yeah. So these are rocks that are just on the street where I live. People just started painting rocks and tucking them into the trees and things. And it's kind of that roll away the stone kind of thing. But, it's just a reminder to anybody who passes by that they are loved, and these are just simple, super simple, multi-generational things that you could do. And the last picture is hearts. This was from the Heart of the Matter series, and just chalk on the sidewalk. Again, it's about Easter season is about proclaiming hope and presence with people. And so very, very simple things that could bring a lot of meaning without a lot of expense, without a lot of energy.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask if you three panelists have any other ideas related to Easter that you want to make sure we share. Anybody? Okay. Any other ideas related to Holy Week that you think really somebody needs to hear out there?
I do want to show one last picture, and that's of this covidprayers.org. This is what I did last year during Holy Week. And this was a display outside the church. And it's just battery operated candles. So it wasn't hard to put together a sign. And then we linked it we made it, this is more technologically challenged, but it's still up and you can still add your prayers. But people can go there and submit a prayer for people that they know that have suffered with or died from COVID. And so a way to get the larger community involved is offering some way, whether it's through a hashtag or whatever it is, but a way for people to acknowledge their sorrow.
Wonderful.
I'd like to add, as we move through Lent, creating a way for individuals to look toward Holy Week. And if it's just emailing in thoughts or questions or whatever they might have to help look toward to that Holy Week, and then utilize that as a part of framing how you enter into Holy Week and the various services. So it then brings the investment of the community into the Holy Week services. And it's amazing, right? Because when you're able to see or hear or identify that my reflection, it's showing up in this prayer, or, that's another way of connecting when we can't physically be together the way we would normally be together. So making that a part of just even the Lenten journey as we are moving through this time of reflection and looking toward what's to come, go ahead and share and submit, and then think of ways to use it.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to ask for Marcia and Kevin to be thinking of ideas related to Holy Communion. And Kalia, I'm going to come back to you and ask for you to say a little bit more about the Easter season. And you spoke a few minutes ago about maybe extending past just that one big day. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that just a little bit.
Absolutely. So, in thinking about the Easter season, it really just allows us to kind of think about all that it means, right? So what is the resurrection? What does it mean, right? To have the empty tomb, which is great to think about because a lot of churches are still going to be empty or very sparse with those who are in there. What does that feel like and look like? And instead of trying to celebrate it and wrestle with it all in one day, begin to spread out across the service, across the season, in moments of either in our worship services, in studies, in small group conversations, actual dialogue and reflection around what does it mean to be a people of Easter? What does it mean to be people of the resurrection in this time and in this season? And what's important for me about us spreading it out across the entire season is because I think we have to build in, while we will celebrate and there's hope that Christ is risen. Christ is risen, yes, and we're also living with loss. Christ is risen, yes, and we also are still in a pandemic. Christ is risen, yes, and there are still many people who don't have access to the vaccine the way they should, right? And so it's holding the realities of where we are in tension with this hope that Christ is risen. And so there is indeed victory over death. But how do I deal with that when I'm sitting in the midst of darkness? But I can still point and look. And so this becomes a really nice teaching moment, I think, this season than we've ever had before, of what it really means for us to walk in our faith and walk in the faith and the power of the resurrection when we're surrounded by so much that kind of strips that hope from us. And so to do it across a season makes a little bit more of an impact on helping our members flesh out the faith thought process and live into it a little more than just trying to hit it on one day. And so I recommend, I love series. Marcia, that's why I love following you, because you do series. That's always what I love, right? Because you can do so much more in a series than you can in one day. And so you create a series that is hope in darkness, or whatever that series looks like. And so your preached moments become a piece, right? You don't have to cover it all, but in the preached moment, you offer just a piece of reflection, but then also builds into that season. If it's sending devotions for churches that aren't connected through the technological means, or if it's creating the conference calls like I talked about, or small group Zoom chat sessions where you can talk a little more and help walk individuals through our real lived experience while we are wrestling with it in light of the resurrection. That becomes a seasonal journey that I think becomes a bit more sustaining for many spiritually than trying to throw it all into one day.
Yep, that's great. Okay, Kevin and Marcia, let's talk about Holy Communion and also Good Friday. I want to go back to that and see if either of you have, and Kalia jump in too, but any particular ideas related to how we might mark Good Friday this year.
As far as communion, I think people are missing community more than anything else. When I speak to my choir members, I know they're missing just being with each other. And Zoom's great, and we talk about how great that we're in this time that we have a way to connect. Because if it were 1918, like it was the first pandemic, we would have no way to connect with one another. So we're blessed with that. But I think people are looking for an opportunity to connect with one another and to see each other personally. So think about this for communion. I love to cook. Everybody knows that. So think about baking fresh bread and taking it to your neighbors, your friends that you haven't seen in a while, and having a shared moment together as you share the bread that you're going to use that night for communion.
Wonderful idea, which could just be on a front porch.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I have a friend that I visit with. She's 88 years old, and she has heated her garage so we can have visits once a month. So she
I
turns the
love
heat
it.
on in the garage, and we meet in her garage once a month. So
Love it. You know, I'm going to build on that, Kevin. Um, the the early church, you know, met together, and it wasn't communion right at first as we do it now. It was an agape meal, and so one of the things that I created last year, or you know, as we went into pandemic, was something called the comfort food liturgy, and it really draws on the early Christian agape meals, and it draws on the meals of Jesus. I mean, he had such a huge meal ministry, right? Why do we have so many stories of Jesus eating? Because he, you know, he used it in radical ways to say this is what really the heart of the matter is. So thinking about using Maundy, Thursday, that Last Supper, as a launching point for perhaps, and then Easter this year is the first Sunday of the month. So if you're in a church that does communion first Sunday of the month, then you have Maundy, Thursday, and maybe you're still Zooming, maybe you're not together, maybe you've exchanged bread. I love that idea, Kevin. But you're then using a meal maybe as you're sitting around the table Zooming for worship rather than sitting on your couch. You make breakfast and you share that together every Sunday in the Easter season. That's what your worship is based around, is this comfort food, right? And we come together to share food, a whole meal together, because this is how we know we comfort. Well, I mean, what do we do? Our culture around funerals is we do food. Right? That's part of what we do in sorrow, is we feed each other. So it could be a really rich way to draw our attention to eating together that eventually becomes that thing we do as communion. But we've forgotten maybe some of those roots that could enliven it.
That's right.
that was the first Zoom call I did with my choir was a brunch.
I love it.
It was great. We had a great time.
Awesome.
Love it.
Yeah, we're
Kalia,
about to
any
do
thoughts on-
pancake Zoom on Shrove Tuesday. We're going to do pancakes on Zoom. Everybody in their
great.
kitchen.
I love it. Kalia, thoughts on Good Friday?
Oh, yes. Lots of thoughts on Good Friday. And probably because this is a huge thing within my own church community. And so this year, looking at Good Friday as the space to really lean into the lament and not try to rush to Easter Sunday, not try to rush to the resurrection, but really having some space to lean into that lament, which means creating some very sacred and honest spaces for community and conversation. That can be in Zoom. That can be in just, you know, how do you have just small talk times, right? Is that 4 people who live near each other get together and socially distance and sit, and you just kind of have these spaces. I think in creating those spaces, especially if you're going to do like Zoom small conversations or do studies on lament during this time, having it led by individuals who have a very strong sensitivity toward pastoral care is important. But this is the place where we get to name our frustrations, we name our losses, we speak the names of those who we've lost, right? We invite individuals in their homes to light a candle and just sit in those moments that will help us just kind of in community recognize, well, we know we're not the only ones feeling it, but it's very different when you hear you're not the only one feeling it, right? And so having that opportunity. There's also a thought that I've been playing with in, you know, how do we move through some traditions, such as mine and others, do normally services of like the 7 last sayings of Jesus, right? Or the 7 last words. But what does it mean to pivot and start to think about those who witnessed Christ on the cross, right? And so those who actually witnessed that loss and who felt like, what does that look like? Who's at the foot of the cross, right? And who's there and who's a part of this, who did not actually die, but who was there and in that space and present. it becomes a really different way to begin to think about those who witnessed loss and felt the loss in that moment. How do we resonate and begin to talk about our witnessing of loss and feelings of loss, and put that in conversation with the scripture? And so I think Good Friday really just has to be the day that we don't speed by it, but we create an opportunity for true sacred lamenting.
Wonderful.
I have just two things about Good Friday real quick. One is I love Kevin's idea of drive-by stations of the cross. The town where I'm living right now, different churches are going to be different stations, so people can literally drive from church to church. There'll be a map. And so, you will drive, and each church is responsible for one of the stations, which I think is just brilliant ecumenically. And the other one is that I have 6 monologues of biblical characters who were present Good Friday, and that's also free at this link that's worshipdesignstudio.com/Easter 2021, and it's in English and it's in Spanish. So if you have bilingual or either or, it's available for that.
Wonderful. You all have shared so many wonderful ideas, and audience, it may not have been apparent to you, but we have tried to address the questions that you've asked throughout the conversation. I believe that there will be a way for any additional questions that you might have or messages that you might want to leave on the Facebook page. Those will stay around for a while, so we might be able to address some of those things. But I think that we have been able to really incorporate a lot of the questions, and we are so grateful for them because you really brought up things that other people I know also needed to hear. So right now we're going to say thank you to our panelists. Kevin Bogan, thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to say real quickly, I want to thank all the churches. I visited so many this year that just didn't stop because it happened. I've watched people do worship on a camera and just to think outside of the box. And I know it was a struggle. I know it was hard, but you have blessed so many people, and you've blessed me by doing what you've done through this past year. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That is right. And Marcia, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. And I just want to echo what Kevin just said. I know, because I meet with pastors every week, I know how, and worship teams, I know how hard you are working. I know. And so I pray every day for all of you.
Yes. And Kalia, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. We're so grateful to have had you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Marcia and Kevin, for being such great conversation partners. And, I'll echo to all who are out here doing it. I like to just share with everyone, take a minute, stop and breathe and care for yourselves in the midst of doing it all. Just find the breath spaces as we move into this season.
Yes, that's a very good word. All right. Well, don't forget that you can find out more about our panelists' books and the websites that were mentioned and all the other resources that we offer at Abingdon Press. And you can find all of those at amplifymedia.com. And just click the free resources link at the top right corner. And that will take you to this webinar and all the other free tools and webinars that Amplify Media has for churches. That's amplifymedia.com. Click the free resources link at the top right corner. We want to thank Amplify for sponsoring this webinar, and I'm encouraging you to stick around for just a few minutes to find out about a special 50% off offer that Amplify is providing during Lent. Once again, I just want to echo what the panelists all just said. Thank you, all of you, for the work that you're doing every week. And God bless you.